Why did you decide to become a police officer?
You know what? I've always wanted to be one. And so as I went through high school, kind of tailored my behavior towards becoming a police officer.
I
And
love
then,
how you worded that. That was brilliant. I
yeah,
tailored my behavior. Nicely put.
yeah. So, yeah, there was no plan B. So I was just really glad plan A worked out.
And the RCMP of all.
Yeah.
Wow. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Yeah. And you know what? I never wanted any other force. So it worked out perfectly.
We've heard a lot about the RCMP as of late, not just recently, but over the last couple of years. But your 13 years has been, I'm guessing it's been everything you dreamed of.
It has been. And like, to be honest with you, when I say 10 more years, it it seems like I have a lot to do in 10 years, right? Like, so because this force gives you so much opportunity that
Hmm.
I've had a ton of opportunity, but there's still so much more to be had.
Shallow, 13 years ago, did you ride motorcycles?
No, yes, I did personally did.
So you had a an introduction to motorcycles. How? Just out of were you living on a farm? Like how?
Yeah.
I'm always very curious about how people start out riding. And I don't mean to sound sexist here, but even women for the most part, mostly it's a male dominated sport, if you will.
Hmm.
So how did you really get introduced to riding?
So I grew up in a farm in Saskatchewan, and my dad brought home a 125 street bike. So we rode that thing through the field, through the ditches.
Wow.
And then when I became 18, I'm like, well, now I need a bike for the road. So then just kind of went from there. And I've always had a bike.
It's funny. My story is somewhat similar as well. My uncle actually had a farm out in Saskatchewan, and now my cousin is running the farm. But at the time, he had a small little, like it was a 125, nothing very big.
Hmm.
And I used to go bombing around that thing all the time, and that was my introduction to shifting and the gas and the brakes. And
Yeah.
if it would fall down, you pick it back up again. But it's interesting how a lot of farm kids are introduced to riding, and it's a great training ground, isn't it?
It is. It is. I don't know. I guess I look back and I'm so thankful that I was able to have that opportunity because now look what it's given me, right? Like,
So this is interesting that we're talking about how people get introduced to the sport. Now let's fast forward to today where there's a lot of riders who are learning. Sometimes I wonder how they're learning. And I don't doubt for a moment that when you see erratic behavior on the roads, you say to yourself the same or ask yourself the same question. How in heaven's name did that person ever get started?
it's a bit scary because really they need a learners. They need to do their learners on their bike, and then from there they could have somebody following them with a class 6 in another vehicle, which really that doesn't do much. If
Hmm.
they're going to get into an accident, they're going to get into an accident, or they don't get any tips when they're riding. So honestly, it's just the test, and then away they go, and they can go buy a 1300cc bike after that.
And that's the thing that scares the heck out of me. Again, as a
Hmm.
kid, just like you were when you were younger, learning on a small little bike that just might fall over and you can just pick it up so easily was not a big deal. But you're right. When you've got something with, that many CCs, do you think it doesn't surprise me to some degree that we see the amount of accidents that we do or the amount of incidences that
Hmm.
we see because of how riders are trained. What's the answer to that? I mean, are our rules so stringent that we don't realize the dangers that we're putting people into? What's your thought?
I guess if I equate it to driving a vehicle, you don't need a driver's, advanced driving education to drive a vehicle. You just need to pass the test and away you go. And depending on what you're driving, that's a huge vehicle that you've taken other people's lives in your hands. Where a
Yeah.
bike, kind of the same thing, but you look at a 600cc like a Gixxer or a CBR, those things are dangerous. Like they're fun, but they're dangerous. So you give that to somebody who just learned how to ride, and I don't even know what they govern. I don't even think they govern. Like I
No,
don't
no.
know. They just like the speed that those things have. I don't know.
It was, it
It's
was,
scary.
yeah, it is scary. It was, we do motorcycle reviews as well too. And one of the ones that I just recently reviewed was a Harley Davidson Livewire. This is their electric bike. I don't know if you had a chance to jump on this bike, but it's just, how do I say this? It's insanity on two wheels, because I literally, not that I ever did, but I went from 0 to in seconds. And I'm an experienced rider. I
Hmm.
handled myself just fine and I knew what I was up against. But what concerns me is that someone who is new to the sport, someone who's maybe riding, who's been riding for 1 or 2 seasons, gets on one of these things
And,
and
and
it's
just
scary
goes.
and
It just
just
goes.
goes. They're putting not only themselves in harm's way, but they're also putting others around them in harm's way.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying. The whole idea of maybe having a graduated motorcycle license, whereas this license allows you a certain amount of CCs or
Hmm.
whatever the heck. I have a feeling you'd be a proponent of that.
Huge, huge, because well, we have the GDL license that there's certain things you can't have alcohol, you can't do certain other driving. But I don't know why we don't have that for a motorcycle, because if you look at motorcycle accidents, the, the person that's going to get hurt is the person on the motorcycle, but the person could have 1 day of riding underneath their belt. So I don't know, definitely a huge component. I don't think somebody with a day of riding should own a 600 CBR. I just, I think that's bizarre that you should be allowed to drive that because they're powerful. They're powerful even with 600 cc's.
The the fact that you can throw in a passenger too, which makes me crazy. Um, think about this: that the riding season, especially in Canada, is very small. It's maybe at best a 6 month window. So the amount of time or practice time, if you will, to be out on the road is diminished significantly because of our seasons.
Yep.
And again, I just, so when I hear statistics, and especially the beginning of this riding season, and you, of course, are a lot more savvy to it than I as Joe pedestrian or Joe public.
Hmm.
When I hear those numbers, I get it. I understand it. And the amount of messaging that we get from the government or from professionals like yourself, who's been riding for so long, professionally riding, it doesn't seem to be resonating.
No.
Somehow there's a disconnect there, Shiloh, that still for some reason hasn't been addressed, and we have to change that.
Yeah, I think it's big, right? It's obviously something that needs to be changed much higher than you and I put together, but it's definitely scary. And when you say 6 months, 6 months is probably that would be in a perfect world, six
Exactly.
months, because I
Optimistically,
think,
yeah.
yeah, because what do they clean the streets in May, June? And so now you're like, oh, now the roads are clean. So even a new rider on the roads when they're full of sand and pebbles and everything else, super dangerous. And then what do we get? We get nasty weather in, October, and there's your riding season.
Exactly. And the messaging that we constantly hear all the time is ride safe, ride safe, ride safe. My goodness, I'm sorry. I mean, I dig the idea of ride safe, but there again, it's not coming, it's not translating into
No.
safety. It's I've seen those accidents. Some of them on, you can get accessible on YouTube and whatnot. There was one just recently on Deerfoot in the Calgary area. There was
Mm-hmm.
one in Edmonton where there was this motorcyclist on a sports bike, and or I think it was a gentleman. He lost control, hit the barrier, and off he went off to the side. I'm going, okay, well, what's that's not riding safe. And the messaging of riding safe to both of those situations,
What happened? What happened? Mm-hmm.
right?
But I think it's like a catchphrase. Like when you tell motorcycle riders to ride safe, they're like, "Yeah, I'm safe. It's the other people around me." I'm like, But that's the part about riding safe, right? Like they don't see you. They're never going to see you. And we can, put it in the news as much as we want to look for motorcycles. It's ultimately, it's going to be up to us to do it because we're like invisible out there. And so you have to watch. You have to watch the car next to you, make sure that if the flash is on that they're going to change the lane, let them change the lane. You're not going to win the fight, so let them change the lane because they can't see you.
The one thing I instill in my two boys is about defensive driving.
Huge.
And I say to them, guys, you know what? Yes, you have to worry about the other person, but your actions will determine your safety. So if your actions are aggressive, if your actions are angry, belligerent, or whatever it might be, that will have down the road some profound effect. But if you anticipate, if you can see far enough ahead or even around you, you're doing not only yourself a service, but you're doing other people around you a service. Because let's be real, sometimes people, whether we agree to it or not, or admit to it or not, are literally doing one of these things while they're driving.
Oh, yeah.
And when they're doing that, I don't know how many times and I can see the person off to my side and I'm going, okay.
They don't see me.
They don't see anything. All they see is the words on their little screen in front of them. So again, I go back to the question of what would you like to see or hear in terms of messaging for riders every single start of the riding season? What can that message be?
I guess I drive my bike very differently than I drive a car. Come to a red light, before I start off, I check the intersection to make sure nobody's coming through. Because, if they come through a red light, it's a ticket, $300 and some ticket. But you know what? If you're in that intersection, you're dead. Like there's no coming back from it, right? So everything I do is defensive driving. I watch the cars beside me. I don't have tunes blaring in my ears. Like you're 100% there, right? Like you mix alcohol with it, you're not 100% there. So I think you have to be extremely smart when you're riding your bike because nobody else is going to take your defensive driving into consideration. You're going to have to do it yourself. Right?
I always say to people to ride in the moment. Because if you're not riding in the moment, like you just said, if you got earbuds in, or you're maybe you've had a bad day at work or something, so you're distracted. If you're not riding in the moment, you're putting yourself at danger instantly.
Yep.
Instantly. Now, let's be real here. There are people who drive too fast. They drive too close to others. They drive a bit too aggressively. We get that. What we're trying to address here, though, are those people who are listening, who are willing to listen, to say that's why this is really important that you and I are having this conversation right now, because I hope if any message is to ride in that moment, because you're right. I want to come home and I want to be able to say hello to my wife and my kids, and so does everybody else.
Yep.
We hear so many times of these accidents, and a lot of them are horrific. A lot of them end on the wrong side, in the sense that someone passes away. Why does it take so long for Joe Public like myself, a rider like myself, to find out more about what that accident evaluation of that collision, if you will, was all about? Why does it take so long for us as a public to hear that?
I would probably say it comes down to a couple different factors. So normally I hear an accident come in and it involves a motorcycle. There's a good chance that whatever intersection or area of the road that it happened in, that's going to be shut down for a period of time. Because whenever there's an accident with a motorcycle, there's extreme injuries, right? So a lot of times if there's major injuries, if it's a fatality, we shut down the road and then we have a person come in and they do the measuring of the scene. And so that takes a long time. Takes a long time to get back reports. And at that time, we're dealing with family. And in actuality, it's the family who's going to be suffering the most. And so we take into consideration that, as well as getting the proper report back, because we don't want to release something that we say, well, this is what I think happened, and then we get the report back and it's something completely different. So we don't want to run into that kind of a situation. But
Would
I
you say
think
it's important for someone like me as a rider to know that information?
I would. Yep.
Okay.
Because honestly, I've lived vicariously through other people. Like anytime I go to a call, I'm like, this is good to know, because I myself will live that way too, right? If I go to numerous collisions where motorcycles are riding at night, then I know, okay, it's obviously not a safe thing to be doing, or you need to wear reflective gear, or so we all live vicariously through everybody else, and that's one way to learn how we can get better at this, right? Because we don't want this to keep happening. We don't want to keep hearing about motorcycles being in accidents and people getting majorly injured. So we do have to learn through other people, through speed, through driver error, right? So I think the time lag is going to be the family who we have to deal with, as well as the proper protocols that we have to wait for the report to come out and then put it out in the media.
See, I'm the same way too. I live vicariously through that as well. I have a friend of mine who loves watching airplane scenarios where the airplane has crashed, and then they explain why the airplane crashed, and they go through a whole set of things. So he loves that because he's learning from it every single time. But we as riders, I mean, I can, you know what? I'm just going to speak for me personally. For me personally, when I hear, okay, well, in this particular accident in Edmonton, or this particular accident in Grand Prairie, or wherever it might be, this is what happened. This is what we've learned from it, and this is the message we're passing on to you. Where I talk about a disconnect, where I feel that there's a disconnect with the information, is that we just don't get it. So what happens is now everybody starts speculating. Or maybe somebody happened to have a dash cam and they just happened to catch a little bit of whatever what was, and so now we start speculating and we say, oh, it's just another crotch rocket, it's one of those crotch rocket guys, blah blah blah, or one of those guys on a cruiser and he's been riding for like 50 years and he thinks he knows it all. Well, how do we know that his tire didn't blow out? How do we know that he didn't hit a patch of gravel? How do we know that maybe he didn't have a medical situation? And this is the part, as a rider, as a personal rider, that makes me crazy, because I almost feel like I've broken up with a girl and I don't know why.
Why?
What can I do differently so that I can make my relationship with another girl even better?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And some of it's privacy, I guess, for like medical reasons. It would be great to know. To be honestly, every time there is an accident, I would love to know what happened. And like obviously we know left-hand turns are very dangerous. We know that because people have done left-hand turns and caused huge accidents. So that's how we know that. But I think sometimes it comes down to a privacy, where we have to respect the family's privacy who may be grieving. And sometimes that outweighs the Joe Public's want to know.
Right.
Yeah.
I would like to see more of that even over the years. So let's say an incident happened last year. It would be interesting to see from the RCMP point of view to say, hey, you know what? This is just our public service information to motorcyclists. In 2015, this incident happened. There was 3 people involved, Here's what we've learned from it, and here's what we want to pass on to you. You have my attention. You have riveted me to the point where you have my attention, and I am holding on to every single word that you've just said. Because the more information we can give to people out there, the better informed we are in making the right decision.
I agree. And not just a catch-all phrase like defensive driving, because some people are like, yeah, that's me, but they don't have a clue what that actually means.
Exactly.
So catch-all phrases don't always work. It's sometimes you need the bitter truth to
I agree.
to send it home.
You and I need to work on that. We're going to do that. I'm going to get you over the next couple of I'm going to get you to do that. I want you to analyze some cases from like 5 years back, and we're going to sit down together and we're going to piece it together, because I really, really think that would be a public service announcement that I would listen to personally as a rider who's been riding for quite some time and realize I can still learn from riding.
Yeah, I agree.
The numbers this year aren't the greatest, at least from what I understand in terms of accidents or in terms of collisions for motorcyclists. The numbers are high.
They are, and you know what? I tried to find some statistics because, like anywhere that's Alberta Transportation seems to take a little bit for their statistics to come in. So I think we're hearing a lot of it through the media, obviously,
Yeah.
but there's also a ton that isn't reported to the media as well. So I would be skeptical to say it's probably low from what we're hearing, or it's probably higher, much higher than what we're hearing. But I don't know. I don't know if it's higher all the time, right? And then we get the report the next year, and there's no impact when it's last year's numbers. I want to hear this year's numbers. I want to know where we are at, right?
This is what I find fascinating. We can find a lot about cars.
Yep. Lots about cars.
Boating accidents.
Yeah.
But when it comes time for motorcyclists, it's almost as if someone doesn't have the time. And frankly, in a sport that you and I both enjoy, that doesn't really help our sport.
No. And sometimes it comes through as generic, like an injury accident. But when it's on a bike and I'm looking at the bike, like there's a reason why we don't have pick your parts for motorcycles, because there's nothing left at the end, right? So injury collisions, when I hear that means they're bad. They're not get up and walk away kind of a collision, because there's nothing protecting you. There's no metal beside you to protect you as you're going through that collision. So they're never good.
Is there one thing that you would, now here's your pulpit, if you will. Is there one thing that if you had a chance to talk to all motorcyclists in Alberta, because I know you're from one of the detachments here in Alberta, what would that one thing be?
Honestly, I'm a huge advocate of not mixing alcohol and riding. Like I don't even like seeing a beer and somebody riding a bike, because with one beer there's liquid courage, right? So I am a huge advocate of not mixing any kind of alcohol with riding a bike. I don't think you're on your game when you're riding around at night. Sometimes you're not as safe as you should be. So that's probably my biggest thing. I used to be in traffic, and that was my go-to. My impaired drivers were what I mostly went after. And when we saw it on a bike, I was just blown away, so I ride the RCMP motorcycle as well. There is a lot going on those bikes, right? And at times I can't even use the radar because there's too much going on. And especially at night, I have no idea how somebody could drive one of those bikes while impaired. Blows me away. So that's my biggest thing is, as soon as I see alcohol mixed with a bike, it's deadly.
And I'd hate to even ask you the question about how many deadly scenes you've come across, because I don't doubt that just one will change you.
Yeah. Yep. You definitely, you learn through other people, because it's a scary thought. And the worst is when you have to go do the NOK, because they're like, I just saw this person. I just talked to this person. This can't be true.
Oh.
Yeah.
I credit you for what you do. Every single day you put your life on the line, and you're there to protect me and others. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for you doing what you do. Sergeant Shiloh Fragomeni.
Good. Very good.
Meanie. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for letting me bend your ear. Ride in the moment.
Thank you. Stay safe.